Welcome everyone to the CBT Nuggets Cisco DNA Center study group. Today we're going to chat with three of our esteemed CBT Nuggets trainers about their new course along with the Cisco DNA Center technology. Today's study group is being recorded, so if you miss anything or you want to share it with your friends or colleagues, it will be available on the CBT Nuggets blog at cbtnuggets.com/blog shortly. They are all trainers for the new CBT Nuggets course, Implement an SD Access Fabric with Cisco DNA Center, available now. The course title, let me go over that one more time in case you missed it. Implement an SD Access Fabric with Cisco DNA Center. Without any further ado, let's go ahead and meet our trainers. First, we'll start with Keith Barker. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having us. Oh my gosh, I love connecting. And, software to find anything is cool, but when you have like a huge campus with like a trillion devices, maybe a few less, managing all that, making sure everything's in compliance, if there's problems, finding out what those are. SD Access and DNA Center, awesome stuff. I am actually the new kid to the block on this topic, so I'm grateful to be surrounded by Jeff and Knox, and I'm glad to be on the call.
I'm glad you said that, Keith, because I got to admit I'm kind of a newbie in terms of DNA Center as well. And since we have Jeff and Knox, let's go ahead and reach out to Jeff. How you doing?
Hey everyone, super excited to be here as well. I got to say we're all kind of new kids around on the block around DNA Center, right, and SD Access. But I love SDA because we finally get to answer the question: what is better, layer 2 to the edge or layer 3 to the edge? And of course, in SDA, it's yes.
And we'll jump over to Knox. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and I want to echo the sentiments that the previous two trainers have said. I really love the ability to just hang out and talk with people about tech and nerd out about things. This is definitely a new-ish product. It's only been around for a few years at this point. So I felt like this was a huge opportunity for us to bring something to the world that I was kind of missing. CBT Nuggets supporting us and making this content was a really big deal, I think. And I'm really excited to talk more about DNA Center because I had a heck of a time recording this content.
Awesome. I want to mention to our audience, if you're watching live, please toss your questions about Cisco DNA Center and SD Access Fabrics in the Q&A module. So trainers, what did you learn coming out of developing this course? Could you talk about some of the things that were new to you? There might be quite a few now that we've established there are quite a few new kids on the block. So if you could touch on the things that would really, help us put it into perspective, at least give us starting blocks so we know which direction to go. I'm going to assume that many of the people listening to this call are already studying Cisco in one form or another, whether it's CCNA, CCNP, or one of the other topics. So could you expand on how it differs from everything else that we've been studying? And I know for me, I would want to know where exactly I should start when I want to pursue this. And we can go to whichever trainer is ready to jump in.
Well, I'm so excited. My question for Jeff and Knox is, should we start from the heart and work out? Or do you want to start at the edge and work in? I'm up to whatever you guys want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I could answer this question and talk for an hour and a half. I got a lot to say.
So I'll just log off.
So Jeff, since Knox didn't want to answer that, you want to start at the edge and work in, or you want to start at the center and work out?
Yes, let's work on the start on the edge and work in. That sounds great.
All right, well, let me kick that off then. So we've known for decades, right, that it's important to know who is or what is connecting to the network. And so we're using some older technology for that. Well, not older, it sounds bad, it sounds like me. But we're using some technology that's been evolved and ready, like 802.1x. Something connects, let's have a chat with a supplicant, let's find out what that is. Is it Bob's computer? Is it Bob sitting at that computer? And so we're going to use at the edge of our networks 802.1x to authenticate that person, verify who they are, and that information, that intel, just doesn't sit there in Identity Services Engine. That gets communicated as part of, okay, here's Bob, here's his computer, he's connected. Now, what do we want to do with that? So starting at that edge, we have some comfort. I call it a comfort food, right? Because of where I'm coming from, we can find out who that person is, but beyond knowing who that person is, there's a whole other world of hurt as far as, okay, what virtual network does he go in? Do we need to remediate it? Do he have problems as far as his security or his posture? Or, what security does we need to implement for Bob and his computer, regardless of where they connect? So that's the first. Now, I haven't talked about layer 2 or layer 3, so I'm going to leave that to Jeff and Knox, but that's one of the first elements about who is that person, using 802.1x and ICE, Identity Services Engine, to prove who that person is, make sure they know who they are, and then once we know who they are, then we can start thinking about policy and tracking that person.
Yeah, and Keith, I love that you just dive right into the security, right? Because where you've got a CCIE in security, I've got a CCIE in data center, right? We both have that route switch foundation. And so it's so exciting to see that. And when I think of SDA and DNA Center, my mind doesn't even go to the security elements. I mean, yes, it does ultimately, right? Because those are some key, very mission critical aspects to it. And we finally have a solution that has security baked in from the ground up. But, like when I think about the edge, I'm immediately going to those VXLAN tunnels. And thinking about, like I said in the intro, we've for years have debated, should it be layer 2 to the edge, layer 3 to the edge. Now we can build layer 3 to the edge and keep the layer 2 functionality using VXLAN tunnels, which of course was a technology that was developed for the data center space. For me, my software-defined networking world started in data center and ACI, Cisco's application-centric infrastructure, which is essentially software-defined access for the data center. Cisco's got a leg on both sides of it, and for right now, it's two separate solutions that can be unified together under the DNA umbrella, which is an excellent way of doing it. But either way, one of the things that I definitely have grown to love and appreciate about SDA is just how we marry VXLAN and Lisp together. These are two technologies that a number of years ago, 2-3 years ago even, for me, were intimidating. Like, oh man, these are new technologies. Even when I was studying route switch CCIE stuff like 10 years ago, nothing had changed for like 5, 6, 7 years after I took that. And then all of a sudden for 20 years, nothing really changed in the route switch world. And now all of a sudden everything has changed in the last several years. And so to see the tunnel mechanisms at the data plane, to see Lisp at the control plane, and to kind of demystify that, I know I've heard from a lot of students who have gone through the Encore stuff and who have taken this SDA course. Like one of the biggest eye-openers for them is like, oh my goodness, I finally understand Lisp. Like this crazy technology that enables the control plane of SDA. And so, yeah, it's just seeing these technologies. So when we talk about the edge, I love the overlay. I love that fabric. And so just to build on the integrated security, Keith, that you're talking about, it's like, wow, what a solution.
Yeah, 100%. I can jump in at this point and say, Keith kind of talked about the security aspect. Jeff kind of talked about the data center and the data plane traveling aspect. And I kind of see this as really interesting coming from an enterprise side of things right now. I'm currently going for my CCIE enterprise. The thing that caught me off guard about this was that the three, you talk about an SD Access Fabric and you talk about the three big technologies that make it work: Lisp, VXLAN, and Cisco TrustSec. Lisp comes from service provider world. VXLAN comes from data center world. Cisco TrustSec comes from security world, and they combine to make an enterprise solution. So enterprise people who are getting into SD Access are now getting exposed to technologies that they otherwise wouldn't. But here's the real kicker. Don't tell anybody this. This is just between us. I still don't know a single command for Lisp or VXLAN or Cisco TrustSec because DNA Center deployed it all for me. That's the real thing here, is that we're working with this gigantic, like you got to think about a hospital that spans multiple buildings, or a college campus with 100,000 people and hundreds of thousands of devices, and the whole thing, we can literally rack switches out of the box, still in their factory defaulted state. Do you want to configure this dialog box? And out of nowhere, DNA Center's like, I got it from here. Thanks. It deploys an entire underlay, it deploys the entire overlay, and all you have to focus on is just the design and the micro and macro segmentation aspects of it. Now, it's not to say that it's easy. It's not. There's still a lot of stuff that goes into it, but it's not as bad You don't have to be like a 4-time CCIE to do this. There are some expert level tasks. The things that really caught me off guard would be things like troubleshooting when something doesn't go quite like you planned, or when there was the border node handoff where you have to do the actual route leaking to the Fusion router. That was a little more challenging. And that's why when I created my CCIE practice exam, that's what the challenge is. It's all about that border node handoff and doing the route leaking on the Fusion routers. So you have to understand the design of how should this behave. And that, anyways, I could go on for a while, but I think this to me was the big thing, was that it's marrying technologies that are used in other aspects, but simplifying how we, the end user or the engineer, can work with it, where we don't have to, master all of these things. We just need to know the tool. And I think that's really cool.
That's awesome. Can I go back to CCNA for a moment? When people are brand new to something, like I heard VXLANs and Lisp and SD, I said, somebody brand new or new to the technology, like, well, there's so much. But here's the secret with everything, is that you get to a level of knowledge by starting with the basics. And that's in CCNA. I mean, in CCNA, they talk about routing protocols, and they don't talk about route leaking. I get it. They don't talk about DMVPNs, and they don't talk about MPLS layer 3 VPNs and route leaking, but the basics of how routing protocols work and the underlay mostly, and then building on that. It's important as you're studying, just to study what you're studying at the moment, and then build on that, and then build on that, and build on it. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. And TrustSec, oh my gosh. I've heard about TrustSec for like almost a decade now, but I didn't really appreciate it until people started using it. And the only reason people started using it was because DNA Center makes it easy to deploy. I love it. Knox like, yeah, VXLANs and Lisp, but I've never seen the CLI for it. I know you could do it, but I'm doing IPsec right now for CBT as part of S-Core. And Knox, you're working on that, and Jeff, I think you're part of that too. Is that right? Are you working on S-Core at all, Jeff?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right.
Doing a few other things.
All right. But I was looking at the configuration for Flex VPN, and I thought, oh my gosh, dynamic virtual templates, static VTIs, dynamic VTIs, AAA. Who would ever be able to configure all of this, right, on a device? And the reality is, not too many. But if our intent, as far as what we want to secure, then we use software-defined mechanisms like DNA Center and SD-WAN and so forth that are going to rain down those configs and do what we need to without us having to memorize it. So it's exciting. And TrustSec, just so you know, is that macro segmentation? That'd be right, or is that micro?
That's
Knox?
The micro portion.
The micro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So within one network, you could have these 2 or 3 groups, even in the same logical network, and these SGT tags, and you specify who can do what, and it says, okay, here's the rules, and no matter where that user goes, he cannot talk to, or she can't talk to this device or that other group, because it's intent-based networking. So it makes the reality of saying what we want to have happen and then actually making it happen, it brings those two into more congruence with solutions like DNA Center, working with ICE. So you can say, I want this to happen, and boom, you're done. And then the assurance, which I'm sure, Knox, you could talk for hours about that too, right?
Yeah. Assurance is my favorite part. It's the return on investment. I mean, the SD Access fabric itself is incredible for what it brings to the table, but assurance that's where your productivity gains come from in the entire organization, because now you have like a huge snapshot into the entire insight of your entire enterprise. It's not just seeing the health and statistics of my network devices anymore. It's seeing the health and statistics of my users. Because DNA Center is so tightly coupled to Cisco's ICE, when someone plugs it, hits their cell phone, they connect to the Wi-Fi or something, it's going to prompt them 802.1x, what's your username and password? ICE captures that authentication and sends it to DNA Center. And now DNA Center knows, okay, Knox is on an iPhone right now. This is his IP address, and this is where he's located. And it stores historically anything that I'm doing. It can track me throughout the building, and it can, identify when I had Wi-Fi problems. It could see where I'm trying to print to a printer. And the cool thing is if I have a problem, I can call into the help desk and say, hey, it's Knox again. I'm having an issue in this building over here trying to, browse to this website or something. And they can log into DNA Center and simply search for my name, Knox. Boom, there it is. The entire Client 360, my entire experience has been stored from them. They don't have to worry about the network devices anymore. Once they're connected to my profile, it shows them the network devices. It shows them the path that my traffic is going through to get out to the other device that I'm trying to get to. I mean, and it does it all deep packet inspection with application-specific information, so they can see, oh, I'm having trouble with Office 365, a business-critical application, and I don't care about is Netflix. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, assurance, this is why when in production environments, when people are rolling out DNA Center, especially in a brownfield deployment where they already have an existing network, what they actually do in phase 1 is just bring everything into inventory for assurance purposes first, just to get familiar and just to get monitoring the network and finding out what's normal. They roll out the SD Access Fabric in phase 2 and 3. So, yeah, assurance is like an immediate return on investment. All you have to do is just bring the devices into inventory.
And so with like machine learning and AI, DNA Center could also find out, hey, what is normal? I've heard this for like over a decade, right? With IPS and anomaly detection, what is normal? But this time it actually does it. It finds out what normal is, then behavior goes off that. It can take action, send alerts, and then give you that telemetry about what's happened over time. I love it. It's really the only way to automation and software-defined networking is really the only way to manage, track a large network efficiently over time. There really isn't another option other than hiring a team of people, but then they still couldn't correlate all that data without some system to do it.
Yeah, it would be a really complicated... I mean, they do have those mechanisms, but it's really, really complicated deployment. We talk a little bit about it in our in-auto course with streaming telemetry, but it's one of those things like, boy, maintaining that can be really tough. Good thing. I mean, you're going to end up spending probably as much or more than DNA Center.
Yeah, and I really think that it's important that we do understand. I mean, what Keith, you said about the CCNA concept, right? Like if you're in a place where you're studying for your CCNA, all of this is just built on technology that already exists. You know, I mean, like we've had ICE for years. We've had Cisco TrustSec for years, VXLAN for years, you know, even Lisp for years in the service provider space. DNA Center is the magic that brings all of this together. The automation capabilities, the fact that it can deploy it for you, that we can automatically deploy, you know, zero-touch provisioning style, throw switches out there, have it push config down there. The assurance piece is something that has been working its way into all corners of the network. I know, again, from the data center perspective, that we've been seeing assurance become more and more prevalent in some of Cisco's products, such as tetration and such. And so, you know, again, it's... Don't get overwhelmed by these concepts so much, because on the one hand, yeah, I mean, if you're going to become a CCNP or CCIE in enterprise networking, you're going to need to understand how Lisp and VXLAN work. But if you're going to be managing a DNA Center environment, or if you're just trying to understand kind of how it all works, so much of it just comes down to DNA Center, the role that it's going to have within operations moving forward. Our networking teams are going to be extremely reliant on this system. And again, it's this concept that we can always hire CCIEs. We can always get really smart engineers to finagle and perfectly tune an environment. But these days, what you really want is you want to be known for somebody who can go in and not necessarily be the best at configuring a router, but you want to be able to analyze an environment and say, okay, this is kind of what we should do. Because these systems like DNA Center and APIC in the data center space, and even in the SD-WAN side, we have vManage, right? And so we've got these different network controllers that are going to deploy our policy for us. So what we really need to be staying relevant is less understand exactly how VXLAN and Lisp work and start looking at policy frameworks. Do I understand how my network should be configured? Because DNA Center will do a lot of the configuration for me if I can tell DNA Center how exactly I want my network to be configured. And I think that's the trick. So that's kind of the new era, I think, of network. The new modern and network engineer is somebody who understands policy and direction and design as much as they understand kind of the bits and bytes. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Am I off in left field there?
I mean, coming off the SD-WAN course, rolling into SCORE right now, where we're talking about Firepower Management Center, doing Meraki content, like software-defined networking is taking over. That's not to say you don't need to know command line. You absolutely do.
Yes,
that
you
will
do.
never go away. But just this really is an unprecedented era where now, because of the efficiency, I mean, automation is an amazing thing that's happening, but where automation is really being captured and used is in software-defined networking controllers. And this is literally what I recorded yesterday for our SCORE course, is what is network automation and how is it being used in the software-defined networking era? I couldn't imagine trying to roll out, a college campus now, like a new college campus or any type of brownfield deployment now with just hundreds or thousands of devices and having to use a console cable. You know what I mean? Like, I know this is ridiculous, but that's just that's it. That's what we're talking about these days, and it's amazing and it's unprecedented.
So let me make sure I'm clear on the console cable analogy there. So instead of, plugging in a device, getting console access through a cable or whatever, and then copy paste or whatever we used to do, right? And then hopefully we got the security baseline template ready. Manually doing that's hours right there, getting it all dialed in, versus taking a device, shipping it to location X, having them plug it in, step back and ask them, please don't touch this for 10 minutes. And then once it's done, it's glued into the rest of the fabric. It has the controller connections. It's getting rained down all the TrustSec and all the other security and options that people need. And it's just done. And then, as Jeff said, you can manage that whole policy from a central place in a controller environment. Which, now there is a one little negative that most people already know, but I want to point it out. And that is, there is going to be a major capital expenditure for a solution like that. But the operational expenditure, the return on investment with the assurance and everything else is, first of all, you have to have it. You have to find out what's going on in your network. And secondly, to do it through just raw manpower probably isn't realistic. So it's a higher capital expenditure, but overall operational expenditure.
Yep. And I think this is where things are going now. So I don't want to say like not doing it is going to be incurring technical debt. That's not necessarily the case because it's not for everybody, right? But if you have the opportunity to do it, sit in on a demo, watch our course. You'll see.
Yeah, and also if you're going for your CCIE, you're going to need to know software-defined access and DNA Center, and also how the CLI works as well, how the protocols work. But it's one step at a time.
Yep.
I think it'd be
If
a
I
fun.
may jump in real quick, we've got a few. Oh, sorry, Jeff.
No,
You
I think that
first,
was-
my friend. I am so sorry about that.
No, the intro took 30 minutes, so maybe we should switch to something else.
That was the intro?
Okay, we have a few questions that are flying in from the chat window. First one, and it's a great question from Idris. I hope I pronounced that right. Pardon me if I didn't. They're asking, do you need any prerequisites to take the Cisco DNA exam? Is there anyone that wants to jump out and grab that one?
Right now, there
can.
isn't. Go ahead.
There isn't a dedicated DNA Center exam right now.
Yeah.
It shows up on a lot of exams, though, especially the core exams. So on-core is where it's most prevalent because this is an enterprise solution, but it's absolutely on SCORE as well. And it is definitely all over the CCIE. The CCIE, first of all, it says there's the first bullet point says design an SD access solution. And now the first 3 hours of the CCIE are centered around design. So you have to understand the layout and the protocols and everything like that to get through that section. And then the remaining portions in software-defined network on the CCIE are centered around configuration. So it's mostly around configuration of policies and configuration of virtual networks and the overlay fabric itself. So while there isn't a dedicated DNA Center exam, there are ways that you can get certified in it. Encore being the most accessible one, but CCIE would also validate that you've actually worked with it before too.
That's awesome. I understand what you're saying, that it's a part of different certifications. I believe I saw it on the NRC topic list, and when I was doing some research into DNA prior to this, they don't really have a topic list that I would expect to see. They do mention what is. They do mention some of the details of DNA on the Cisco Learning Network site. So next question would be, how do you feel DNA compares to other solutions in the market that you've heard of? And this is coming from Lance, who also says that he's not really familiar with any competitors' products. Anyone want to give that a shot?
I've got a little something I can chime in with that. It's
Go for it.
nobody has a competitive product with us when it comes to an SD Access fabric. There are amazing controller-based solutions out there for large enterprises. Juniper has one. I think it's called Mist, but there's something else out there too that they have that is for managing a large enterprise. But I don't think anybody's doing anything quite like SD Access, where it's truly about the policy. It's about the intent. And not so much about, this IP address goes here and this ACL goes here anymore. That's you can do those things, but you don't need to with DNA Center. There are, like I say, there are some enterprise controller-based solutions, but I don't think anybody's doing anything quite like SD Access. I could be wrong on that because, I've been in a Cisco world lately, but I do try and keep on top of those things.
I'll chime in with this too a little bit. There are always going to be some competitive products out there that are focused on delivering the end-to-end layer 2, layer 3 network. I know that there have been some vendors out there who tout what they have. Even Cisco, we don't have to deploy SD Access to get some of the benefits we've talked about, right? We could deploy Cisco TrustSec already. We can deploy VXLAN. We can even deploy Lisp. Now, Lisp is a Cisco-only technology, as a Cisco TrustSec, of course, but you could deploy VXLAN with multi-protocol BGP. It sounds complicated, but it's really not that bad. So all that to say, you can achieve layer 3 underlay with a layer 2 overlay. You can achieve that with any product out there. The magic that Cisco really brings to the table is, as we already talked about, the automation capabilities, DNA Center at the heart of this, delivering the automation and the assurance piece that brings all together with baked-in security from Cisco TrustSec. So that's where, Knox, I agree with you. It's hard to find a product out there that really checks all of the same boxes. There's definitely some overlap, and you can find some Venn diagrams out there about who does what and where they step on each other's toes. But that's certainly one of the most compelling reasons in my mind for going with SD Access is DNA Center itself and all of the capabilities it brings with it.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. We have another question from Yash. He's asking, how can he lab SD Access? Last he heard, DNA Center was not virtualized.
Ooh. You start with a server with 2 terabytes of RAM. No, I kid. Knox, I think you should just tell him.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways that you can do it. The first and easiest one is with the DevNet Sandbox or with dCloud. Wherever possible, I point out ways that you can access it in our content. The Inato course in particular makes use of both the DevNet Sandbox and the dCloud. In fact, the assurance stuff that I've been so high and bragging on, they actually have a full-blown assurance demo in dCloud that's got hundreds of users, and you can see them moving all over the topology and everything. It's a great way to see the return on investment with assurances in dCloud. DevNet Sandbox, it's hard to get a reservation for the DevNet Sandbox. They're reserved pretty far in advance, but it's, again, another free resource where you can access any of Cisco's platforms. All of them are available for free for you to use right now. That being said, I'm not going to say that you can't virtualize DNA Center because it has been virtualized. It runs on ESXi. But you have to have all the licensing, and you have to have a gigantic server. It's nearly impossible unless you've just got a huge set of resources behind you and an enterprise license and everything like that. So yeah, that's really the way I would recommend to anybody is check out the DevNet Sandbox and dCloud.
And just so you guys know, that would be devnetsandbox.cisco.com. and dcloud, like D as in demo, I think is what maybe stands for. I don't know. dcloud.cisco.com.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We have another question from Owen. Can DNA Center integrate with other network solutions outside of the Cisco DNA Ready solution?
We're all nodding our heads.
Well, they've got the SDK. There's APIs galore. So it really is up to your imagination and how much you want to code it, because I think it can integrate. If you have two devices that speak the same API and you've got somebody who can write those APIs, you can actually do custom integration with almost anything, right?
Yep.
And
That's
there's some pre-baked integrations also with other Cisco platforms like ACI, APIC. For example, I mentioned that there's two separate solutions. If you're running ACI in your data center and you've got a microsegmentation policy built with endpoint groups or EPGs, that's what we use in the ACI side. We can map endpoint groups into the Cisco TrustSec world and basically map the tags with one another. So the Cisco has some baked in ones, and then again, the sky's the limits as far as APIs are concerned.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. There's the westbound API, which is all about integrating with our other already existing services. In fact, they've now baked in vManage, the SD-WAN solution, into DNA Center. So there's actually like a little section where you can configure your vManage credentials, and now you can handle your software-defined access and LAN capabilities within DNA Center, and then your WAN capabilities, which can even transmit SD Access Fabric information by integrating with vManage. And then there's the eastbound API, which is like, well, there's not a built-in solution, so to speak, but I can create one of my own. And it's pretty incredible. But just like Keith and Jeff have also said, there's the multi-vendor SDK. So if you need DNA Center to bring in other vendors' devices into inventory and at least use it for assurance, you can do that too.
Worth pointing out, just to piggyback on that comment, I mean, I think for a while now, Cisco's been directing, the direction Cisco's been going is to unify everything underneath DNA Center. So yes, vManage as part of the SD-WAN solution is now within there. I don't have any inside scoop on this. I just strongly suspect that with the integrations we've seen with ACI, that eventually ACI will also be brought in underneath that umbrella. And so, Cisco's really moving towards DNA Center being truly the heart of our entire network infrastructure. And so we're going to see more and more integrations into potentially call center, call manager, potentially other security solutions, etc. DNA Center is going to be a big deal, I think, moving forward as well.
Great. I wanted to jump in with another question from our attendees. Arash is asking, he says that he has a CCNA and he started DNA, but he honestly doesn't feel that he knows anything about DNAC. And I got to tell you, all the acronyms, I'm already lost. Basically, what I'm getting out of this question is, how do we get started training for this? Knox has already identified that it's going to be a component in several different certifications. So where do we start aside from, where do we start? We'll start there.
I'll jump in, give my thoughts on this. If you already have your CCNA, I think one of the best things you can do is go for the Encore. The Encore is just going to build a stronger, firmer foundation for the networking concepts that we build all of this on. So you have to understand a little bit more about VXLAN and Lisp and CTS, for example, Cisco TrustSec, as part of the Encore process. And within Encore, very light, here's how SD-WAN works, here's how SDA works, right? And so from there, I think you can catapult yourself into going a little bit further. But I know for me personally, over all of this about software-defined networking, overlays and underlays, all of that, even attending this webinar, for example, right? Every little bit just has put another layer of understanding to the point that it started to stack up into meaningful grasping this technology. It's not something that's intuitive, that comes overnight. There's no real aha moment. It's just, in my experience, this is me personally, it's just been gradual. Oh, okay. Oh, I understand a little bit more. Oh, I understand how a REST API works a little bit better now because I put my hands on it. Download Postman, run some REST API stuff. Every little thing you can do will add up. And so just start the process one step at a time. Keith, Knox, what do you guys have to think about that one? I'd like to get another opinion on that too.
I've got a lot of opinion on that one. So again, there's two CCIEs on the screen over here in this direction of me, and then there's a guy who knows a lot of CCIEs, and I've been currently actively going for my CCIE. Let me repeat and reiterate this. I still don't know really any commands for Lisp, VXLAN, or Cisco TrustSec. So when we talk about like learning DNA Center, and we're learning, like you see Lisp and VXLAN and Cisco TrustSec and route leaking, and it's so incredibly intimidating and overwhelming at first. Know that when you look at these blueprints like Encore and stuff, they're just trying to show you the fundamentals of the working points. You don't have to know how to configure service provider technologies or data center technologies in order to learn DNA Center. That's the first thing I would say, is that it is very overwhelming at first, but don't be intimidated by it, because you're not going to have to do like insane amount of work to get caught up to speed with it. The second thing I'll say about it is that Jeff's Encore content was a game changer for me when it was time for me to take the Encore exam a few months back, because Jeff's got this huge amount of experience with these types of technologies, so he could break down and explain it better than I ever could, how like Lisp works, and then how VXLAN fits into the big picture. And beyond that, he uses many different colors when he draws things, and I still cannot, I'm not coordinated enough to do it. So it's a really good, like I would say definitely start with Encore content. And then if you have this intellectual curiosity, like, well, how do you do it? That's when you jump into some of our SD Access content in the training, even though Jeff reiterates and goes over that content in the SD Access course as well.
I appreciate that, Knox. It's always fun to hear that, because I learned so much from your content, and so like that I can help you out. Awesome.
Keith, do you have any tips on training for DNA Center?
Above what Knox and Jeff just said, no, I think we're good.
Great. I have another question from Jebby. He's asking, what kind of hardware would you need? I assume he's referring to setting up some sort of a lab. He threw out a couple of examples, 9300, AP,
okay, yeah.
or ISE.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Knox,
this is Jeff territory.
I
can take it.
Yeah.
So I experienced some issues with my hardware during the lab and learning process. When I was beginning to do this course, right, the DNA Center arrives at my office front door in a brown box, and it's like, go get him, Tiger. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's time to like learn and make an SD Access fabric come to life. And there's like, at the time, there weren't a lot of resources out there, and I was kind of scrapping and clawing from different places. So I went out and I bought all of this different hardware, and like half of it didn't work. So it was a huge bummer. In my lab, for just a small lab, I use Catalyst 3850s. That's important. Running iOS XE 16.9. That's important. And with the IP services and DNA Advantage license. That's important. It's not just about the hardware, because you do have to have compatible hardware. That is definitely a thing, but you also have to have a minimum version of iOS XE, and you also have to have a minimum level of service license in order to support things like the ISIS protocol and VXLAN and Cisco TrustSec. So the things that I encountered, like when I was learning along the way, I can say, like I bought these Catalyst 3650s, but first of all, they shipped with iOS XE version 3. And when I went to do LAN automation, the way LAN automation works is under the hood, even though it's on the factory default dialog box, there's a little plug-and-play agent that's listening for commands. So DNA Center tries to talk to that plug-and-play agent, and it couldn't because it didn't have the latest version of the agent. So that was a whole thing about upgrading them into the latest version and then factory defaulting them again. That had to be done. But then once you've got them, you've brought them into the network and LAN automation is done, then it's time to deploy the fabric. Now we have to have Cisco TrustSec, VXLAN, Lisp, ISIS, and all sorts of things. And without the correct license of the IP services, I wasn't able to do that. So that one shipped with the LAN-based license, and that was a huge problem for me too. And I never ended up getting those to work, so I had to go buy more Catalyst 3850s. The Catalyst 9300s, the 9Ks are great. The 9500s are great. As far as the wireless LAN controller, the 9800, which can be virtualized, is great. But then when it comes to the access points, you have to make sure that those access points are compatible not only with the SD Access Fabric, but also with the wireless LAN controller. There's a whole lot of things that go into designing the wireless portions, like even your region codes. So you jump onto eBay, you buy some access points, and then you find out they're like, from South America or, China or India or something, and they're not in your region and they can't talk to the wireless LAN controller in the first place. So, there's all sorts of caveats and nuances that you need to know before you just go out and buy an SD Access Lab and Fabric. And I try to talk about those as much as possible. The longest nugget I've ever shot for CBT Nuggets is right around 17 minutes, and it's troubleshooting LAN automation in DNA Center. And it's because I just learned so much throughout that process when it comes to compatibility, hardware, designing the routing up front in order to make it work. It's a big deal. So I would definitely say before you go out and buy equipment, watch our content first, because you will learn the lessons that we learned along the way.
Gotcha. I have a question for Keith from Jeff H. Keith, he wants to know, how does Cisco Firepower interact with DNA and vice versa?
Well, there is Firepower has its own controller, Firepower Management Center, which you can use. It works great, no problem. But the hooks and the APIs between Firepower and also DNA Center, I haven't used them that much. I've seen your videos, Knox. I know you discuss that and talk about it. But instead of using Firepower Management Center for your policy, I believe you can just push all that right through DNA Center. And Knox can correct me if I'm wrong there.
I'm not 100% certain on that one either. I haven't seen an integration that's that tightly coupled between Firepower Management Center and DNA Center. I'm going to guess that there is one. The APIs are, pretty straightforward, and I'm sure they could talk to each other or at least bring them into inventory. But I don't know that DNA Center could push policies to Firepower Management Center. I would have to double check that to verify it, but I don't think it's designed to do that up front. I think those are two separate solutions there.
Thank you, Knox.
Great. Thanks, Knox. I've got a question for Jeff. As DNA Center is bringing SD-WAN vManage in, does that mean that the two products would be sharing information, or does that mean DNA Center would be able to manage or control SD-WAN?
Yeah, so keep in mind the fact that when we talk about any of these SDN like controller concepts, we're actually the how do I say this? The graphical user interface that we're using to interface with the device is simply using the APIs in the back end. And what I mean by that is, like, when I grew up in the networking world, when I first started, I was doing a lot of Cisco access point configuration, like the old 1131s, 1232s stuff. I mean, like, these are, this is dating me a little bit. But they had a graphical user interface, and, when I was first learning the CLI, I was like, man, I'm still learning all these commands. I'm just going to use the GUI interface. And boy, did that cause me a whole lot of grief. And the reason for that is because the CLI was the only real way to interface with the access point. So when Cisco built a GUI, the graphical user interface, it was really just injecting CLI commands on the back end. And if it worked, great. And if it didn't work, it caused all kinds of problems. And so, like, if somebody got onto the CLI and did something that the GUI wasn't aware of or didn't expect, then the whole thing just fell apart. The difference, the reason I say that is because the difference is these days, when we're talking about vManage is just a GUI that is accessing the exact same REST APIs that we would use on the, to access anything within the management system. So when we talk about bringing vManage into, and underneath the DNA Center umbrella, really all we're doing is saying, okay, rather than using our GUI to access vManage, the vManage GUI, we're going to use DNA Center, and all of those exact same API hooks are going to be used to access the system. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, but and Knox, you're the one who brought it up earlier about vManage being brought in. Have you played with that enough that you can give a little more concrete of an answer around that specific integration?
It's on my to-do list, and it's one of the reasons I fired up my SD Access lab a couple days ago again. And had to do a little troubleshooting there, but to bring it back to life, but it came to life. And now that we're wrapping up the SD-WAN content for CBT Nuggets that's coming soon, I've got the opportunity. I've already got an SD-WAN solution in the lab sitting up here, so I can just plug it right into SD Access and see if it works. What I would like to say about this is DNA Center as it stands right now is really cool when it comes to integrating with vManage by handing off to vManage to do vManage's job. SD Access is and DNA Center is primarily concerned about managing the enterprise LAN side of things in the SD Access fabric, and then creating transit fabrics either between SD Access fabrics or just for IP connectivity. So it will create your SD Access fabric, then it wants to know how should I hand it off to SD-WAN and let SD-WAN take it and run from there. Again, kind of like what everybody else has been saying up to this point, wouldn't surprise me one bit if one day vManage was just baked straight into DNA Center as an additional license or an additional feature or something like that. Because even the SD-WAN platform itself is moving more towards Cisco and less of Vitella, right? So, we're deploying more and more C edges now, which are absolutely capable of being managed by DNA Center. So I think that's something to keep in mind, is even if the integration isn't exactly how you'd expect it to be today, who knows what we're going to be seeing at Cisco Live next year.
Great point. I've got 2 more questions, and we only have a few more minutes, so we'll jump through these questions and then we'll share some closing thoughts. One of the last 2 questions is for Jeff. How does CCNP Data Center relate to the DNA Center? And that's coming from Nolan, who is logged in and watching.
All right, well, thanks for the question, Nolan. Yeah, the CCNP Data Center is not going to, we're not going to see any DNA Center on the CCNP Data Center exam. So that's going to be very focused on ACI. Right now, according to the blueprint, because we are doing a little bit of DC core work, but the DC core blueprint does not include anything on that. So, we've said a few times here, you've probably already kind of gotten a little bit of the answer to your question through the course of this webinar, but the solution on the data center side of the fence is very different from the solution outside the data center. And so DNA Center exists outside the data center, ACI exists inside the data center. We can integrate them right now, but they're still 2 separate systems despite the integration. So
I think we should just add the word center to like 5 more things.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised.
Data center, DNA center.
I felt a little bit like a tongue twister there a few times.
Keith, I have one last question for you from Ogheneta. I am so sorry if I mispronounced your name, my friend. Keith, his question is, how can his team build a firm Cisco career? And he's very specific about Cisco.
Gotcha. I would say if you have a team and you want to build a really solid Cisco career with that team, I would encourage everybody on that team to, as they're learning new technologies, learn it to know it. That's the one differentiation that I see all the time. If somebody's just trying to get certified and they want to memorize an answer like, I'll go to CCNA level. Like, where do you apply an extended access list? As close as you can to the source. They have no idea what it means. Like, most people, that's one of the, telltale signs, you have no idea why. That when they jump out to that answer, it's just, I know that's the way it's supposed to be. Don't know why. So I would say that as you're studying, whether it's, route redistribution, whether it's MPLS layer 3 VPNs, maybe it's ARP or DHCP relay or VXLANs or Lisp or DNA Center, whatever it is, as you're learning it, learn it to know it. Imagine the big secret, I think, would be as you're learning something, think of yourself, okay, how would I teach this to a really good friend and demonstrate it? Could I do it? And if you can't, study some more and then practice it. Because when push comes to shove and we're asked to go consult for a company or our business needs a solution, they are relying on us. And not just our knowledge, but our troubleshooting skills, as Knox and Jeff will attest to, and our troubleshooting as we go through to implement it. So if you want to be really good at anything, whatever that technology is, could be Palo Alto, Cisco, Checkpoint, whatever, is to, as you learn it to really know it, practice to verify you know it, and then practice teaching it to somebody else just to verify you've got the knowledge, and then never stop. And then you'll have authentic knowledge. It'll be congruent. Your certifications will help you represent what you know, and those skills will help you and your team become a tour de force in implementing solutions, whether it's Cisco or anybody else. So hopefully that helps, is learn it to know it and move forward.
Keith, I have to share real quick. I worked at a Cisco partner for the better part of 15 years, and I did a lot of technical interviews during that time. My favorite question to ask, kick off pretty much any, what doesn't matter if CCNA, CCNP level, CCIE, explain ARP. And I can't tell you that, like, the answer to that question set the tone for the entire rest of the technical interview. Because I had CCNPs who were like, address resolution protocol. I think it has something to do with IP addresses. You know what I mean? And it's like, well, wait, ARP is the glue that holds layer 2 and layer 3 together. And if you can't explain ARP, then whether I don't, like I said, it just, as a minimum, if they couldn't answer ARP, the rest of the technical interview wasn't going to go well. I just knew at that point. And so just being able to explain the why behind why are we using ARP, why are we using any of these, any of these concepts. I love what you said there. So I just wanted to share that one little thing. That was my favorite question on a technical interview. People had a hard time answering it.
Awesome. Gentlemen, we are at the 5 minute closing mark. I wanted to give each of you an opportunity to give us any closing statements, any advice that you haven't shared yet. We are certainly open for it. And before I forget, I wanted to thank you for all of that great information. So we can start with, let's start with Keith, if you wouldn't mind. Closing remarks.
Okay. My closing remark would be something I learned from a training manager I had like probably 20 years ago. He used to play football in high school, and he said that it hurts. It hurts to get hit. And like, oh, big surprise. Thanks for the newsflash. That was the younger me being a little sarcastic. And he said, once I came into terms that it was going to be hard and it was going to hurt a little bit, I just took that, accepted it, and just went to work and just made consistent progress daily, weekly, monthly, realizing there's going to be a little pain involved. I just pushed through it. That's true with IT. I mean, I am 50. I was born in 1964, so you can do the math on that. And every week, as a double CCIA, every week I had the opportunity to have a little bit of pain and push myself to learn something new, or to relearn something I knew 10 years ago and relearn it again. But the idea is just lean in, put the time in, put the work in, and it'll pay off. It won't always be easy, but it's always worth it. And as people look and say, how do you know all that? It's like one day, one topic at a time. That's it.
That's great. I really appreciate that, Keith. Yeah, that one resonates with me. You got to put in the work. You gotta take a few of the licks, so to speak. Jeff, did you want to go next?
Sure. Closing arguments, right? Well, if you're going to apply to a Cisco partner, know what ARP is. I'll tell you that. Keith, I wanted to say something along the same lines. It's easy to come to a webinar like this and look at like 3 people talking into a webcam, and like not one of us would say that we have arrived. That we fully grasp every little detail of DNA Center, of SDA, of SD-WAN, of all of these topics. Having 2 CCIEs, like Keith said, doesn't mean you've arrived. It doesn't mean that you've got it all. In fact, the moment that you think you've arrived and you start just sitting back is when the industry is going to move on without you. And so it's always a matter of just that daily attitude of, having humility, understanding that I have a lot to learn today. I can tell you, Jeff, when I woke up, I've got a lot to learn today about whether it's SDA or SD-WAN or what have you. And so to have that humility, to have the desire to just kind of push forward one step at a time and to keep moving towards that. I know we had several questions about just like, how do I even get started on this, and how do I get to this level? Open up your CCNA book, open up your CCNP book, sacrifice an hour of Netflix time or an hour of video game time or whatever it is that's holding you back from just putting in a little bit of effort. It doesn't have to consume your life. I'm a big work-life balance person. You know, an hour, most of us have an hour we can give up. We don't like to admit that, but we're either on Facebook or on our phones or watching Netflix or something that's just like we could give that up if we truly had the heart to do it. So make your commitments, make that decision, and have fun. This stuff is cool. It is a lot of fun to learn this new technology.
Agreed. Thank you, Jeff. Knox?
I'm sorry, I was on Twitter. Can you repeat the question?
Do you have any closing advice for us?
So, you know, kind of echoing what the previous two just said, let me put this into even more perspective for you. We're here talking about DNA Center, and I would wager that almost all network engineers don't know much about DNA Center right now. You have the opportunity to separate yourself. So with that little bit of pain, taking a little bit of a licking, or that 1 hour that you have to give up, if you learn about DNA Center, you can roll up to work the next day being the person who knows about it, and whereas everybody else doesn't. So maybe if you're, you know, whatever your motive is, maybe you want to elevate the coworkers around you, or maybe you're competing against them to, you know, to get that next big promotion. Keep in mind that like most enterprises right now don't have a solution like this, but you could be the person to bring it to them. And even if it takes 6 months to get to that point, that's fine. I really think that our content that we put together, at least when I was going through DNA Center and I was having to learn it for the first time, I literally had to pull from video training, forum posts, white papers, documents, Slack channels, in order to bring it all together to make one course that covers how to deploy an SD-Access fabric. So I like to think that when you go through our course, we are trying our very best to set you up for total success in one place. That way you can be the person, the DNA Center person or the SDN person. So, you know, just stick with it. I promise there will come a moment where you're like, oh, I can't wait to talk about this tomorrow at work. And it's going to pay dividends.
Outstanding advice. Gentlemen, I want to thank you on behalf of all of the attendees for all of this great advice and all the great information. We're going to go ahead and wrap up now. We're running just a moment over. So I want to thank everyone for joining us for the CBT Nuggets Cisco DNA Center study group. Follow CBT Nuggets on social media for announcements on new training, updates, and more events like this one. If you missed anything or would like to share this webinar, it will be available on the CBT Nuggets blog at cbtnuggets.com/blog shortly after this. On behalf of Keith Barker, Knox Hutchinson, and Jeff Kish, and the team at CBT Nuggets, we hope that this has been informative for you, and we'd like to thank you for viewing. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.